Welcome back to Petty Astrology. I'm your host, Kaycee Felton-Lui. Another wild and wacky week in 2024. Who would have thought? Who would have thought? I would have thought. I've been saying this for a while. We are in for quite the year, and the news is not going to stop newsing. But I wanted to talk about the fact that astrology is not making anything happen. And if you are familiar with astrology or you've been listening to me for any amount of time, you've probably heard me say that astrology is a reflection, meaning that just because Mercury is about to retrograde doesn't mean that Mercury is making our tech go haywire or making our cars act up or making traffic even hairier. No, that's not how it works. So astrology is much like a clock in a way, but think about it. If you look at a clock, is the clock making it the time that it is? No, of course not. That would be kind of silly, right? And it's very much the same way when we look at the astrology. The planets are never making stuff happen. But if you've studied, if you know your shit, and you look at an astrology chart, the position of those planets can give us information about the energy of any particular moment, not unlike the hands on a clock indicating what time it is. So when we talk about planets, I try not to talk about them as if they're Greek gods that are punishing us at every turn or making our lives harder unnecessarily, because that's really not what's happening. And that's also not really a helpful way to view things, right? If you view the universe as out to get you, well, you might find that you find a lot of reasons to make that feel true to you. So mentality, the way that we think about these things, is everything when it comes to astrology, because there are plenty of people online who will talk about astrology until they're out of breath. And they will talk about it in a way that's not very empowering, that makes you feel out of control, subject to something else outside of yourself. And it's so important to remember that we have free will, we have agency. And knowing the astrology can be so helpful in how we navigate the times that we're living in. Because if we know that 2024 is a big year, it's a transition year, then that can help us steer a better course through that energy. We can plan things differently. We can make sure that we have resources and support and strategies to move through the energy in a way that is more empowering to us and hopefully to the people around us as well. I talk about Pluto in Aquarius often on this podcast, and the reason for that is that we are entering a new moment. Pluto is in Aquarius right now. We've gotten a little bit of a taste of it this year and a little bit in 2023. And Pluto will be moving into Aquarius for the next 2 decades in November. So we're in a new moment. We're in a moment where things are shifting dramatically. Things are changing. We are seeing things that have been under our noses this whole time, but we're seeing them in a new light because we're having new experiences, we're getting access to new information, and there is this opportunity with Pluto in Aquarius for human beings to work together in ways that they have not done before. Because we have a small planet full of billions of people. And as a planet, we are facing things like climate crisis, like the rise in fascism, like pandemics. And those are not things that we just pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps and get ourselves out of. That's just not how it's going to work. But neither is Pluto in Aquarius a magic wand that is going to get people to cooperate, to communicate, to work together, to be in solidarity with one another. No, that's going to be on us. Those are our decisions to make because, again, astrology doesn't make anything happen. But what I do think about Pluto in Aquarius is that it means that we're going to have to collectively change our behavior. Many of us as individuals are going to have to make that decision to do things differently. And before you go, oh no, I hate change, it's uncomfortable. I get it, it is uncomfortable. But what if those changes resulted in a lot more people living healthy, fulfilling, and joyful lives? Would you be willing to make some changes if that was the end result? My guest on the podcast today is somebody who's made those changes and continues to make them, who's oriented their life around community care and doing what's best for them individually, but also what's good for the people around them too. And they've managed to make a life that is more joyful for those changes. So I hope you'll listen to our conversation with an open mind, understanding that just because we're standing on ground that doesn't feel very solid right now, that the future has the potential to be a hell of a lot better than what we have right now, and that you can be a part of creating that future. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Gata, the bureaucratic baddie, for a conversation on radical community care. After that, I'll take a look at the astrology of the week ahead, including getting you ready for Mercury retrograde. All right, I am so excited to be joined by Gata, the baddie. How are you today?
Hey, Kaycee, I'm doing good. And yourself?
I'm good. I'm very happy to be having this conversation with you. So, I met you earlier this year, and honestly, I was in a pretty rough place mentally because a lot of people that I was in my COVID pod with, and a lot of people that I have been around, had kind of just given up on taking any sort of COVID precautions. And so, I found out about mask blocks, and I met you at a mask block event, and so that's how we know each other. And since then, I have seen you organize different COVID safer events, and you do a lot of other cool stuff too that I would love to talk about. So I'm so happy to have you here. Let's talk about like where you from, where you're from. Like what's the origin story for Agatha? Where'd you grow up?
So I grew up in San Francisco. So I was born and raised there. I lived in Venezuela for a few years, then came back, um, and then lived in San Francisco after that again, and then I moved to LA about 10 years ago.
All right. So you've been in Angelino for a minute. And how did your growing up experience, because you are somebody that also calls yourself the bureaucratic baddie. And I was like, oh, hell yes, hell yes. And before we go, I'm going to read out your big six for people so that they can get an idea of who we're talking to here. So you are a Scorpio rising, you're an Aries sun and Mercury, a Taurus Venus, a Gemini Mars, and you also have a Scorpio moon. So, looking at your chart, knowing that you're the bureaucratic baddie, you also have Saturn in your third house and you've got Jupiter in your ninth house. So, I'm just seeing a lot of financial aspects in your chart. Like, it doesn't surprise me that you're somebody that one helps people work through systems and also helps people with money. So I'd love to hear more about the work that you do as bureaucratic baddie.
I feel like when people ask me like, well, when did you start, your radical perspective or
Mm-hmm.
these other things, it's interesting. It's like it's so hard to think of because it's been such a long time. I was really, really thinking of like, when was the first time I started being involved politically in anything? And the earliest memory I can think of was middle school.
Mm-hmm.
I used to, so living in San Francisco, so I lived near like one of the Muni stations, and there
Mm-hmm.
was the Muni carts or whatever, and there were people like smoking there, and I was like, wow, a whole bunch of kids take this bus to go to school, and there's a whole bunch of people smoking. And I ended up like getting signatures from everyone like, hey, we should stop, we should put a sign and tell them they can't smoke here because there's a bunch of kids here. And I remember I got like, I don't know, 50, 60 signatures, and like I went to City Hall, and I don't really remember what happened, but I just remember like that was kind of one of the first times that I was like,
Yeah.
okay, there's something wrong here. We should fucking do something about it. And I think since then, I've always been like doing community organizing where I'm just like, if I don't know what to do, hey, I know that I don't like this. Does anybody else not like this? Does anybody else want better? Do we want more? What do you know? And for the bureaucratic baddie, I would say that was so the bureaucratic baddie was kind of inspired from the corporate baddie. There's someone called a
Mm-hmm.
corporate baddie on Instagram who has like the funniest like corporate like just work from home corporate videos that I thought were just hilarious. And I thought of kind of what is it that I offer to people, and it's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of like navigating the bureaucracy. So I learned how to file taxes when I was 19.
Wow.
And so how I got into it was there's my mom, she's an accountant, and she was working for a nonprofit where they do taxes for free for the community. If you hear of a school, a nonprofit, whatever that does that, it's through a program called VITA. So VITA is like a nationwide program where it's like, hey, it's this thing of like they teach you how to file
Mm-hmm.
taxes so you can offer this for free for the community. And so my mom was one of the coordinators for that. And she was like, hey, why don't you just join me? And at first I thought she was just trying to get a ride from me, And I was like, all right, fine. Let's do it. And so I didn't expect to really like it because it kind
Mm-hmm.
of felt like a puzzle. Like it was less about like, oh my gosh, how stressful taxes, and
Mm-hmm.
more like figuring out a puzzle. And it's interesting when people tell me they're like really bad tax stories, and I don't have that experience because
Mm-hmm.
the only people who have filed my taxes have been my mom or myself. Like
Right, right.
so I,
You're like,
I
what's that like?
but yeah, it's just been it's its own language.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the day that it clicked and I was like, oh, now I understand. And what I love doing is being able to break down like these complex things
Mm-hmm.
into like things that are more accessible for people. So for example, when I talk about the 1040 form, right? I say the 1040 form, for example, think of it like a living tree, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everything lives on the 1040. There's squirrels, there's the leaves, there's, the branches, whatever, So the 1040 represents the entire tree. Your schedule A, your schedule C, are the branches, your 1099s, the W-2s are like the leaves, and you connect the leaves to the branch. So I do cute things like that to
Mm-hmm.
really just kind of help people connect that. And so, yeah, I've been helping people file taxes, and I've been filing taxes for them since I was 19, and I'm 33. So it's been a good 13-ish years,
That's
13, 14 years.
amazing. That's so
Yeah,
cool. I think that it's amazing as somebody who is not like a numbers person. I so appreciate those of you who are really good at this stuff. And I don't know about you, but it feels like to me that a lot of our government systems are almost intentionally difficult to understand.
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and it's kind of like this is why you need like a lawyer to be able to defend yourself in court because
Hmm.
it's intentionally made that way. Um, and so for me, I landed this job at the county, the LA County here,
Hmm.
as a small claims court advisor. So there's actually a department where you can literally call in and be like I want to sue somebody. What do I do? You know? And I was one of the people on that hotline, and I would help tell people, like, you have to fill out this form. Okay, you had this issue, excuse me. Fill out this form, submit this. You need to have your evidence ready. So I learned so much from that job.
Hmm.
And for me, the biggest thing from that job that I learned was how to sue your landlord, especially as we move. It's something that's kind of widely known and accepted is that your landlord just steals your deposit. And
Right.
you're so exhausted with moving, you're so exhausted trying to even come up with the money, you're exhausted, to the deposit, and then finally you live somewhere and you're like, all right, now I'm caught up with bills, or I want to just
Yeah.
like chill. I'm not trying to think of how to sue my landlord or get this money back, whatever. I'll just accept that it's gone. And Yeah, it was so interesting because I had sued my landlord actually before I had this job. So it was interesting to see like just navigate this as like I have no clue what I'm doing and
Hmm.
panicking to like being on the other side where like now I know all the information and I was like, "Oh, okay." Something I want to share with probably some people who live in LA County who are watching this, or actually not even LA County. This is the entire state of California. If
Hmm.
you live in anywhere in the state of California and your landlord doesn't give you back your deposit, there's California Civil Code 1950.5 that says if your landlord doesn't give you your deposit within 20 days of you leaving, you have the right to sue for up to 3 times the deposit if you can prove that the landlord kept the deposit in bad faith. So once I had learned about that, I said, oh, all right,
Got
I
him.
took my yes, I had taken my landlord to small claims court and
Mm.
I won. I didn't win the 3 times the amount,
Hmm.
unfortunately, but I did get my entire deposit back, which was like the best thing ever. So I think when I had gotten to that point, so I used to sell merchandise actually. I called it angry feminist merch. So I had shirts that say men are trash.
Hmm.
I had, shirts that say fem labor's not free, which I feel like those two go together very much hand in hand. What were some other ones? Men is short for mensos y mentirosos, like, men are like liars. Like it's just, cute little things like
Hmm.
that. And I got to the point where I was like, all right, this merch making stuff isn't really making me that much money. And I have to do a lot of physical work for this.
Hmm.
And I kind of looked at like, well, what else is in my toolbox of things that I can do? And I was like, well, I know how to do taxes. And that's just hopping on a phone call and talking to someone and helping them navigate. You know what? That's actually much more money. And I don't have to do as much work. And
Right.
also showing folks how to sue, not just your landlord, but I know as a femme myself, I get really nervous of like going to a mechanic and they like scam
Right.
you and you have to pay all this. I also know how to sue your mechanic if you there's like the potholes on the roads. You can sue the government and say, no, you fucked up my car. I know how to do that too. So with the mix of all that, I was like, wow, this really is just navigating the bureaucracy.
Right.
And so that's how bureaucratic Baddie was
Was
born.
born, yeah. We need a chart for bureaucratic baddie, a birth chart for bureaucratic baddie. It's so interesting looking at your chart. You have Jupiter in your ninth house, and you also have your South Node in your ninth house. And I'm going to translate that. Don't anybody worry. That to me, like one, it's kind of giving like lawyer vibes, like that you can confront these systems without fear. Like you're just like, it is what it is. And I don't know if you're somebody that believes in the concept of past lives, and it's totally cool if you're not, but that South Node being there, I'm like, you very well could have been some kind of lawyer or teacher of some kind in a previous existence. And like, because you have those skills, it seems like so naturally. Like, you are somebody, even just on social media, like, I just feel like you naturally take this position of education. And it's so, I think, necessary and helpful that, those of us that are good at those things, that we uplift them. And so I really appreciate the work that you do. Why is it so important for you to teach these skills and use these skills in the way that you do?
I feel like we have much more agency than we think we do. I think there's so much propaganda and so much of the system that just wants us to take the road of least resistance of, the what can you do?
Yeah.
And it's just so easy to just give up that I feel like it's really important for us to always take back our agency when we can and whenever it's most accessible to us. Because sometimes things are just way too out of like, okay, look, I can't do that. But sometimes things are more accessible than we think it is.
Yeah.
Um, I feel like I don't have a big platform. I think if you have under 10,000 followers on
Hmm.
Instagram, you ain't shit in these
Right.
Instagram streets. That's just my opinion. So
True.
I'm under the 10K. And I remember when the pandemic first started, I was like, I had seen, there's Jessica Salgado, who is a poet, also based out of LA, and she had posted something like, "Hey, I want to help some moms get their groceries, or something." And she was able to raise all this money and give to these, I think it was moms or families, and they got, their groceries. And I was like, I want to do something like that too. I think at that point I only had like 3,000 followers. And I was like, even with this tiny platform, I'm sure if I'm just like, look, I want to just raise money to just give away to people, especially when the pandemic hit, thinking of myself being in a very privileged position of like, I was able to get unemployment, I was
Mhm.
able to get stimulus checks, I was able to get food stamps, like I sprained my ankle actually April 2020, and I had to just lay in bed for like a month. And I was like, wow, I'm okay. I'm not going to get evicted. I'm not,
Right.
and me and a group of friends, I was like, let's just raise money to give away to folks who are undocumented, who are single parents, who aren't getting stimulus checks, can't get food stamps, can't get this. And my idea was, I'm going to just try to raise $750 to give away to somebody. And I put that out there. And literally by the next day, I had gotten to the goal of 750.
Wow.
And this turned into a larger project from April 2020 to December 2020. Me and a group of four other friends, so five of us total, we raised nearly $50,000 off of
Wow.
like Cash App, Venmo, PayPal. We were just like, look, we are literally trying to give away this money to folks, again, undocumented, single parent, whatever. And people really trusted us and were like, I remember one day somebody even donated their entire stimulus check. I got a Venmo for
Wow.
$1,200. And I was like, awesome, let's do this. And
That's
so a
so
bunch
cool.
of folks got $750. We did was it like not a raffle, but when you randomly select people, so
Hmm.
people filled out a form, we randomly selected,
Lottery.
and a lottery, just like a
Hmm.
lottery, and we were like, here you go. And people were like, are you a nonprofit, are you the government? I said, no,
We're
we're
better.
literally right. And we're literally just a group of people that were like,
Yeah.
let's do something.
Yeah.
And I never expected it to get this much, and I don't know. I think Jupiter has something to do with this. I've been told that the
Okay.
abundance, I think the Leo Jupiter thing
Hmm.
is like the abundance and all that stuff. So sometimes
Sure.
I think it may, you would know better. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's why I think it's important to just really just whatever platform you have, whatever skills you have,
Yeah.
put it out there. Like you just never know what it could become, and it could become much bigger. And you're here kind of just limiting yourself.
Right. And I love that your kind of origin story, even just with that middle school like smoking situation, it seems like you are really focused on, just seeing something in your day-to-day life and then being like, "Oh, I have a solution to that." And it can be really that simple. And I think for a lot of people that maybe are newer to organizing and, utilizing, even if they have, a small platform or a small network, there's stuff that you can do with that. And you don't even have to go very far out of your day to day life to engage in building community or mutual aid in whatever way that you can. So I think that like that's a really amazing example for people that are listening, that you use skills that you just already naturally have. I would also say, like, you've got in your second house very much has to do with money, as does the eighth house. But you have Uranus and Neptune in your second house. And for me, I would look at that and knowing what I know about you, there is, in terms of resources, you do have like I would say, a radical orientation towards your resources. Like, having both of those planets in there. And I feel like you are just somebody that if you have extra, and somebody else needs something, that you're just naturally going to meet that need because you can. And it's so wonderful to see people that, like we don't even see people that are billionaires do that. Like you don't have to be a wealthy rich person to help other people. And I think that the myth of charity has led us to that, right? Like charity, the idea of charity, which I've kind of been critical a little bit about on my platform, just explaining to people that like, you know, the idea that rich people need to bend down and save us is like is not really the way that we should be thinking about moving forward and distributing resources. Like, oh, thank you so much. And that we do have a lot of agency to help one another and redistribute resources. So I think that's very cool. Are your parents radical? Is that something that you got from your family?
I've been estranged from my family for quite a while now, but I feel like I was always kind of the one radical one in my
Right.
immediate
Same.
family of I always asked too many questions. I was always
Mm-hmm.
like, but why? Why are we doing it this way? And everyone, like I remember my brother once was talking about having like his pet or something, and he was like, and I was telling him like, you can, there's like there's this not a it's not even California thing, it's like a
Mm-hmm.
nationwide thing. I forget what it's called. It's like where if you get, if your animal,
Mm-hmm.
sorry, if your dog, cat, whatever pet is an
Mm-hmm.
emotional support animal, by law they cannot say, hey, we're charging you a
Right.
pet deposit, we're increasing your rent. And so I was trying to explain that to him, and he was like, you know what, I don't care, I'll just pay. And like
Mm-hmm.
that's very much like
Right.
my family versus like, I'm like, wait,
Yeah.
we can do this. um and I kind of wanted to go
Mm-hmm.
back to what you were saying about
Yeah.
the charity thing. And I don't know if you're into
Mm-hmm.
tarot, but I've been getting into tarot the last few months and talking about the
Mm-hmm.
6 of Cups versus like the Six
Right.
of Pentacles. You know, where the 6 of Pentacles, folks listening, you can Google it. It's like this rich person kind of like looking down on the poor people here,
Mm-hmm.
giving like money, versus like the 6 of Cups, which is much more of like a
Mm-hmm.
mutual aid. So the 6 of Pentacles is very much like a
Mm-hmm.
charity card, and the 6 of Cups is more of like a mutual aid of like, you see these two kids kind of giving each other like cups and resources and that. And so the 6 of Cups comes up a lot in my readings. And so when I think of like mutual aid and all of this, I think a lot of the 6 of Cups as well.
Do you feel like community in some senses is like an extension of what you consider family at this point in your life?
So I would say, as someone who is estranged from, her
Mm-hmm.
family, and I think something about just being queer is very much
Mm-hmm.
having to find your own people and having to set boundaries. Like, I feel like my Saturn's return, before I even knew what a Saturn's return was, I remember being like in my mid, 20s before my Saturn's return. And I was like, you know what, by the time I'm 30, I don't want to feel like I have to be forced to shrink myself to be more appealing to people,
Right.
especially people I consider close to me. If I have to shrink myself to be in friendship or be close to somebody, I don't want it. I don't want it at all. And so it kind of was like this thing that I started to like prep myself for, by the time that I got to 30, that I was like, I don't care if you're family, I don't care if you're somebody I've known for however many years. Like, if I have to shrink myself, or I feel like you're not taking me seriously, then you're out. That's it. um and so, yeah, I feel like, especially with the coviding precautions of like,
Mm-hmm.
the same way how you felt, of like everybody else around you just gave up, and I was like, no, there has to be, like, I feel like there's always been something in me, like, and I've found myself doing this at different points of my life, where I felt like, wait, I'm queer and I don't really know queer people, and I'm around all these straight people, there has to be other queer people that are like me. um Being Afro-Caribbean, it's like there has to be other Afro-Caribbean folks, and seeking them out. And the same this time with being COVID, as someone who takes COVID precautions, it's like I cannot be the only one who takes COVID precautions, who wants to socialize safely, and is looking for community. I cannot be the only
Yeah.
one. And I think that's something about me, and maybe you see it in my chart, but especially
Yeah.
I think of it with my Aries of like, once I set my mind to something, it's like, I don't care. Like, I know it's out
Yeah.
there and I'm going to get that shit.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I do feel like you are somebody that I could see you being very particular, like about who you consider community. Like it's not just like everybody is in, but it feels like you have a lot of qualities that would make for like leadership within community. And I've certainly like I haven't known you for that long, and I've already like it was very obvious to me that you are somebody that is you're just good at leading people and educating people and walking through things with them. Also, your Saturn is in Aquarius, so when we think about authority figures in our culture is so unhealthy. So many of us grow up not only culturally having figures of authority that are really authoritarian or just straight up abusive, but also a lot of us deal with that in our nuclear families as well. And for you, like, I feel like with that Aquarian Saturn, especially, and also just knowing what I know about you, you have your own brand of authority, and I think it's more of a progressive, I think, vision of authority. Like you just know stuff, you have a specific life experience, you have specific things that you're good at. You have that Aries Mercury is in the sixth house, which to me tells me that you are somebody that is a specialist at what you do. Like you have specialized knowledge, and you could use that in a myriad of different ways, but you have chosen to use that, going back to your second house, as something that is for collective benefit, which is a choice that we can all make. We all have different skills and abilities, and they're different. They're not going to be all the same. Like, we don't need a bunch of gatas in in the mask block. Like, we need definitely more people to be trained and be able to like host events, so it's not all on you or one or a group of particular people. Like, we can share that responsibility, but you're really good at it. You're really good at exercising that leadership. So I really appreciate that. And so, what has really surprised you the most about how the average person is dealing with COVID these days?
I think there's something that I used to say myself that I've corrected since then, since my friends have like educated me on this. It's like a lot of the propaganda is very much like, oh, COVID precautions, that's something immunocompromised and disabled people have to deal with. If you're able-bodied, like, you're good. Don't trip. And it's really just kind of understanding, like, we are, of people who are able-bodied, like, we are actually temporarily able-bodied in the sense of like, we are all like high risk to COVID and the
Mm-hmm.
vascular disease that it is, and learning how COVID is more like HIV. It acts more like HIV than it does a cold or a flu, right? And a lot of people just kind of getting lost in the plot, and it's very
Yeah.
much just it's hard. It's really hard as someone who is like deep in the COVIDing community, and I'm just like, how
Yeah.
do you not see this? But there are people who really just don't know, and a part of me is kind of like, why don't you don't aren't you curious to know
Yeah.
why I saw a group of people wearing a mask, this person's wearing a mask, why?
Mm-hmm.
All right, let me
Yeah.
go on TikTok and find out. Like, there are so many things that we see, for example, like the genocides, the multiple genocides that are happening, you know on TV, we don't see any of that. We don't
Right.
see it on CBS or on CNN, like the truth, but we all see it on Instagram. We all see it on
Mm-hmm.
TikTok, and I just wish people would be able to like use those same critical thinking skills in other places. And I think
Yeah.
what's really surprised and also disappointed me is just like when the pandemic first started, there was a lot of death. There was a lot of us being scared, a lot of the unknown of like, wait, this is the first time in our lifetime that I could think of something like this happening where,
Yeah.
we all have to stay at home and like all of these like issues that were easy, I guess, for a lot of people to ignore or not think about were really highlighted, right?
Yeah.
And with that, I feel like I don't think people remember how we were able to get a lot of things that we thought were absolutely like, we could never get that.
Right.
You know, like the idea of like stimulus checks, like, oh, everyone's just going to get $1,200. Here you go. Oh, shit. You
Right.
know, there was like more people were getting more in food stamps. People were able to, I think, even get unemployment, even if they weren't like laid off. Like, even, like
Mm-hmm.
I think I had quit my job and I was still able to get unemployment when that was never able to, for whatever. And I remember in LA, like the smog cleared out, like nature was like thriving in
Healing.
LA,
Yeah.
healing.
No
Um,
traffic.
no traffic, school shootings stopped. There were no,
Yeah.
they were saying this is the longest period that there hasn't been school shootings. You get me? People could not get evicted for not being able to pay their rent. Like,
It was amazing. That was a period of time, Gata, that like I feel so stupid now, honestly, like foolish, because I got actually really excited that things were going to change in a better direction, that people would see that the government was capable of a lot more organization and support than we were being offered, and that us changing our lifestyles so radically had a lot of benefits to it. So I was really shocked when we let all that go, like willingly.
I'm just like, y'all, we literally got everything, not everything, but we got a lot of things that we thought could
Yeah.
never happen. And like, why are we letting this go? What?
It was great. It was amazing.
Like I remember even like shit like that would be difficult with bureaucracy stuff. It'd be like, oh, I have COVID, or oh, because of COVID, this can't happen. Oh, okay, fine, this is waived. Like I think you were able to get like bank fees waived. Like, look,
Mhm.
there's a pandemic. Oh, okay, fine, we'll waive that. It's like, and the fact that there's still this ongoing pandemic and people just are listening to the propaganda. And I like, and like I said, again, it's like that whole thing of like seeing on TV what they are talking about is one thing, and what we see and what we're hearing from each other is something else. And I think it really probably came down to like, what are you willing to sacrifice? What are you really willing to sacrifice? Because I think, this is just my opinion, I think it's like easier for people to say free Palestine when we are so far away from
Right.
Palestine. We are so far away from Tigray. We are so far away from Sudan. We are so far away from like all these places. And all you have to do is just not buy this one thing. Okay, cool.
Right.
And share some stuff on Instagram and donate some money here and there. Like that's pretty accessible. But I think
Yeah.
this idea of like, oh, like, and I think it comes back to like imperialism and the internalized imperialism that we all carry as Americans that live here, of like this idea as an American, I'm supposed to have access to everything. You're telling me I should withhold, not withhold, but like I should,
Like adjust your behavior. Yeah.
right, this idea of, I could go to brunch because everybody else is doing it, but I'm not going to do it because, COVID and there's this like a raging surge happening right now. What?
Yeah.
No, I'd rather just go to brunch.
Right.
So I guess the thing that I think about is just like, what are people willing to sacrifice? And something else that's also disappointed me is just seeing a lot of queer BIPOC spaces that, like, zero precautions, zero, not a
Yeah.
masks encouraged, not hey, I don't know, maybe you should test, like,
Yeah.
and even
Nothing.
it's nothing, it's like below
Yeah.
bare minimum.
Mhm.
And like I've seen these nonprofits where, and I've been to their events before the pandemic, where it's like, hey, there's this free event,
Mhm.
or I think they partner with somewhere and it's like, oh, you get an HIV test. If you do the HIV test, you get into the place for free. You don't have to pay like the ticket to get in. You get free food. You can get an Uber ride back home, like all these things. And I see that that's still happening where it's like, oh, look, we're doing a yoga class. It's
Right.
free. There's going to be food, free HIV testing, free STI testing.
Yeah.
No one's wearing a mask. No mention, like, and this is happening literally as we are surging. Like, even on TV, they are saying that it's surging right now. And I'm just like, where, yeah,
Yeah.
it's,
It's very frustrating. It's frustrating to watch. It's very alienating for sure. So I mean, despite all of that, we know that COVID is very serious. Honestly, I talk about it on this podcast. I'm aware that a lot of my audience is not COVID cautious probably. I that's my guess. And I definitely don't want to make people feel bad for because there is so much social pressure and so much propaganda and then a complete abdication of responsibility from both the government and the media. So, I understand on a lot of levels why people have stopped taking precautions, but why is it that you still are taking precautions?
I would say, I mean, I am taking precautions probably as a selfish thing, to be
Hmm.
honest. I
Yeah,
just don't want to be sick. I don't
same.
want a
Illness.
chronic disease or illness.
Yeah,
um, you know, diabetes, high blood pressure is something that runs through my family. I mean, I don't know what black or brown person of color who like doesn't have issues with diabetes or high blood pressure or these other chronic things, where like COVID exacerbates that. And like I said, it behaves more like HIV than it does a cold or flu. So even though you have acute symptoms and you're like, oh no, that was just bad allergies and I'm good now, it literally hides in your body for years. There's my homie Lola Germs, which I would highly encourage all your listeners to go on YouTube and look up "Why Is Everyone More Sick" by Lola Germs. That's one of her latest videos. She does this in depth, epic, epic documentary. My homie over here doing the public health department's job for free. Let me tell you,
right.
an epic hour-long documentary on long COVID. Like, what is long COVID? Why don't our doctors know what long COVID is? Why doesn't anybody I know have long COVID? Like, she breaks it down. And something that really, there are a lot of things, a lot of really good gems in there. But one thing that stuck out was the how she talks about the parallels of HIV and COVID, and also there's something called a latency period, which is the time between when you're exposed to something that can cause a disease and when you start showing symptoms. So there are people who were exposed to HIV and they didn't have like AIDS symptoms that showed until like a decade later. And they're saying that COVID is it's acting very much like this in the same way. Um, and I also take precautions because I don't like this whole idea of like, if you're immunocompromised or disabled, just stay home, or if you're sick, just stay
Right.
home.
So
That's
ableist.
that's very ableist. Like, I want to dance, I want to
Yeah.
socialize with other people, I want to have movie nights, I want to have pottery classes, I want to do everything everybody else is doing, but I want to
Oh,
do it in a
yeah.
safe manner, in a way that's safe for each other, that's safe for me, that's safe for you, and safe for the rest of us.
Yeah. And I feel like that is really truly like what are we doing with community if we're not protecting each other on just the most basic level? Like really, for real. Like what are we doing if we I've been baffled by the same thing, like queer people that have just given up, especially considering that we as a community have already gone through a pandemic that was, it hit a lot of queer people. And, you know, it's not that unlike this. It's just we're we have to take a different type of precaution. And it does scare me like that so many people, like I can't explain, I've never been through something like this psychologically what it's like watching, so many people that I care for deeply put themselves at risk and continue to get reinfected with something that I am so worried about the long term repercussions. And I think that for a lot of people that maybe aren't queer or maybe just not very educated about HIV, a lot of people that are infected with HIV, it's not that is not what kills them. It's subsequent infections because their immune system is so compromised, which is what COVID, we know that COVID damages our immune system and then some. Like that's one of the basic things that we know about COVID. So it does scare me that you and I think are both taking precautions. Self-preservation is certainly up there for both of us, as I think it should be. Like I'm not letting this take me out, you know what I mean? Like I have work to do here, and I want collective liberation, and
Yep.
I view this life for me is how can I move it forward. I don't think it's any one of our responsibility. I think it's a collective responsibility, but
Mhm.
it does really concern me that people aren't taking care of themselves, even like that we're at such a point where people might feel so hopeless that they don't even value their own safety and health at this point. Like, how do you feel about that?
How people don't wait, ask me the question one more time.
So I would think, like, I understand that people don't want to be inconvenienced or feel like the odd person out. But I would think that at the very least, people would care about protecting themselves, even if they like don't give a shit about anybody else. I think what scared me is that I am getting the sense that people don't care to protect even themselves, and that concerns me.
Hmm.
My question is, what do you think about that? Do you feel like we're at a place where people are maybe just so hopeless, or I don't know if they're just like dancing on the Titanic kind of vibes, but like it does feel like people don't even care to protect themselves anymore. And that has been shocking to me. So I don't know if that surprised you at all, but I have a lot of bad feelings about it. As we move forward, like right now, we are kind of at the start of the Pluto in Aquarius era. And so we're getting a taste of it right now. We got a taste of it in 2023, and then we're finishing out. It's retrograding back into Capricorn in the fall, just in time for the election. So that'll be very interesting. It's a big year, and then it moves into Aquarius for the next 2 decades. And what this is showing me is like we are obviously seeing a rise in fascism globally. That's part of that, is that this conformity that is being, that's what fascism is that it forces people to fit into a very narrow mold, and it's, very controlled. And that I think is one of the reasons that we will see people organize, because we are seeing right now like we have to organize. And communities, even pre-pandemic, communities that have been marginalized have been organized and organizing for generations because they've had to. So it's not like it's just happening now, but I do feel like it's going to broaden with Pluto and Aquarius, because not only do we have this pandemic, we have climate crisis, we have the rise of fascism, like there's so many reasons. And so I don't I try not to like harp on it a lot, but I can't stress enough that one of the reasons that I'm seeing we need to work together is because of COVID, and because a lot of people are being disabled actively. So like we're in the shit. I don't say that to freak people out, but I want people to be aware of like where we're heading,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
the implications for that. So with that said, we've got mask bans coming down the pipeline, which is something that I actually predicted months before it started happening, because of this, because of what we've been seeing with the protests and how they've associated masking with, a criminal element. And, mask bans are something that will be used against more marginalized people, particularly. Like it's not white people at Whole Foods that are going to be threatened by the mask ban. So, what are you thinking about as an organizer, a COVID conscious organizer? How are you feeling about these mask bans?
These mask bans are, very scary. Um, just as you said, as someone who is a person of color, um, it definitely feels like it's just another excuse to target us, and um, as we have these park meetups that you said that this is where we had met. um, I was really just kind of talking to the organizers of like, hey, we need to come up with a safety plan. Like, what are we going to do if people harass us? Because there are people who already harass. You'd be surprised.
Yes.
I don't know if you saw that when you were at the park hangouts, but a group of people wearing masks at the park, like people
Hmm.
sometimes shout weird stuff to you, give you really weird looks. You feel kind of like, what's happening?
Yeah.
Um, and a part of me fears, like, what happens if someone attacks us and the cops are called and all they see is a group of people, especially a lot of people of color, wearing masks? How is this going to turn up as? And I think it's just important, again, to think of like, just how do we keep each other safe? How do we keep each other safe through this? We definitely, I really think there more people need to normalize wearing a mask, like, especially, like, it's a very easy,
Yeah.
simple
Power in
thing to do.
numbers. Power in
Yeah,
numbers.
everybody's doing it, like,
Yeah.
if everyone's doing it, they can't all throw us all in jail or all,
Right.
come after all of us. It's like we really need to bring that back, not just for, COVID stuff, but also for like surveillance. Like, it also helps
Yeah.
keep our identity secret, or not secret, but like
Less obvious.
less obvious, less easier for them to use
Hmm.
AI and all this other stuff
Yeah.
on us. But yeah, it's been interesting seeing that how they've been connecting, like
Hmm.
protesters and the masking stuff. I remember when UCLA, not UCLA, well, yeah, UCLA, Cal State LA, they had their student encampments
Hmm.
and they had like COVID precautions. And I went to actually Cal State LA's encampment and they were really good about, no, we all have to wear a mask. We all have to take precautions. And and it was just this, like, it was such a beautiful space to be in, of like art, of community care. People are taking COVID precautions, like, all, like, it felt like all the intersections and all these things that we're talking about here were actually being applied there. um and now that the encampments, for the most part, yeah, are like pretty much gone. I know that, of course, the spirit is still there where people are still resisting and all that, but it really just, yeah, it, yeah, I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, I'm just very concerned. It's another expression of fascism, and I think it's one that people that aren't still taking precautions are way too comfortable with, because it doesn't
Yep.
matter if you're not taking precautions. You should be really concerned that the government is coming down on people this way and inhibiting people from doing something that protects not only themselves but you as somebody who's not masking. The more of us that are not contributing to, fucked up air that might have COVID in it, the better. So it's really in everybody's best interest that we all be allowed to continue masking. And, we need to understand that the government is going to use any excuse that it can to continue to police us, because we live in a police state. And I talk about that a lot. Just because somebody isn't knocking on your door and taking you to prison doesn't mean that we don't currently live in a police state. So it's paramount to me that we encourage people to mask, even if they don't give a shit if they get COVID. If you care about collective liberation at all, like, I would hope that at least standing up for the rest of us who don't have we don't have the ability to unmask and just let it rip like other people apparently do. So yeah, what would you say for people that are just the average person? What could they do aside from masking to better protect themselves day to day?
Like, I've learned of it as like the top three things that you want to do when it comes to
Mhm.
protecting yourself from COVID RSV and all these other respiratory things, right? Because there was a TB outbreak in Long Beach not too long ago. There's apparently a Hep A outbreak in LA. These are all things that are spread
Yeah.
through breathing, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
not just COVID, it's all these other things. The top three things you want to do, of course, the first one is mask, but another thing is to clean your air with like air purifiers. And I know air
Mm-hmm.
purifiers can become expensive. There's something called the Corsi Rosenthal box,
Mm-hmm.
where you pretty much just you tape up a bunch of air filters and you put like a fan on it, and it's like altogether it costs like maybe 70-80 bucks to put together with like some tape, the filters, and the box fan, and it's as comparable as like a $500 air purifier.
Oh, wow.
So there's like the box, the wedge, and then there's just like also I have like a whole, I can send you the
Mm-hmm.
link and maybe you could share it with your folks too.
Yeah, I'll put everything in the notes because I think this information is so important. I want people to have as many resources as possible. So that'll all be in the show notes.
Yes. So I'll share that with you. I break down how much it costs, where you can get it, how to put it together, the videos of how to put it together. Um, but having definitely those, throughout your house, not
Mm-hmm.
just one in your room, one in the living room, and all these other spaces, because just there's air that's just always circulating, and you want to make sure
Mm-hmm.
that air is circulating and that it's getting cleaned. And something else I would say is to test yourself pretty often. There is still access to free tests. You can, in LA County, I believe, you can go to the LA libraries. Some libraries still have it, some don't. I can also send you the link of where people can find what libraries do still have it in stock.
Okay.
Um, and I believe in the rest of California, at least, I've heard of folks in Northern California where they also have free tests available at their library. Um, Connect with your local mask block, because they also have free tests and free masks, and they kind of do all the behind the scenes work and they provide this for folks. Um, because 40 to 60% of all spreads are asymptomatic when it comes to COVID.
Yeah.
And that's so people, I used to be like, oh, if you feel sick, just stay away, which, yes, but you could also show up, not look sick at all, and be completely infecting everybody around you. Um, I mean, look at Biden, like literally a
Right.
couple days ago, tested positive, and he's out here shaking hands, meetings, doing all of these things. Like he looks okay,
Yeah.
if you look at the videos, like he looks fine in the
Mm-hmm.
sense of like he's talking. I don't see him hacking anything,
Right.
but he's out here infecting everybody around him, and everyone's like, "Oh, all right, whatever."
It's just wild. It's wild. Absolutely wild. So I know that a lot of people who are not taking precautions anymore, it may feel like there's no way to gather safely. Like I feel like people feel like it's just too complicated. They have no idea even where to start. So as somebody who is a COVID conscious organizer, what tools can you suggest for people who want to plan safer gatherings?
I would say it all starts with masking, right? We need to be good about keeping our masks on the entire time, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, I've even been seeing like COVID safer, like people who do take precautions do COVID safer events, and they're like, oh yeah, there's gonna be food and drinks there, and I'm just like, wait,
What?
that involves taking off our masks and sharing the air. So that's a little dangerous,
Mm-hmm.
especially knowing about all these other things, how the spread can be asymptomatic, how it can even dodge COVID tests,
Right.
because rapid antigen tests aren't really that good if you just take one rapid antigen test, like the 15-minute ones that you can buy,
Mm-hmm.
at the store. One test by itself is 26% accurate for a negative.
Yeah.
26%. It goes up to, I believe, 60 something, maybe
Mm-hmm.
60-70% with like 48 hours in between, and then something like 80% when you take 48 hours in between 3 tests.
Mm-hmm.
which of course sound expensive, especially if you don't have access to free tests.
Yeah, absolutely.
So again, I think it's definitely connecting to the mask block, seeing, what's up. Um, I would say with organizing COVID safer events, so yeah, it's keeping our masks on. Um, when we do test, I think it's important to share the results of our test with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Not with each other, I guess, as people, but to the organizer, and the organizer should be keeping track of that. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think anyone is maliciously trying to, do anything, but I
Right.
think just for accountability, that's good as well. I think trying to prioritize outdoor hangouts as best as we can, is also good as well, is also good to do as well. I do have I did some slides on Instagram, on my Instagram, on for
Okay.
things for people to consider.
Mm-hmm.
And as we are entering this new world of asking people to test and mask, I think something else is asking people to eat and drink before or after the event, to kind of
Right.
avoid that stuff at the event. Um, Janae and I, of course, our mutual
Mm-hmm.
friend Janae, uh, we we came
Shout
up
out
with this.
Janae.
Shout out to Janae. We run a ship as tight as our pussy. All right, so
And I've
that's
seen it.
yeah.
I mean, not that, but like the ship I've seen. Sorry. Let's clarify. Let's clarify.
You
The ship
know,
is tight. Can't speak
the
to anything
ship
else.
the ship is tight. I will tell y'all, the ship is real tight, in the sense of we do a lot of letting people know ahead of time, because even if you
Mm-hmm.
can't do masks on the whole time, well, then just be honest about that, write that
Yeah.
somewhere, so people who do take precautions can decide, all right, do I want to take this risk, do I not?
Right.
Okay, what
Transparency.
what type of masks, because people will say mask required, and it's at
Mm-hmm.
the very end of the caption on Instagram, nowhere on the flyers. I'm just
Right.
how
You
are
could do
y'all going to
better.
enforce, right, how are y'all going to enforce this? What type of masks? If there is going to be food, do you have a separate area for people to take off their mask to eat and put it back on? I know for my events, I've really just been saying, hey, y'all, just eat before, eat after. And if you have to eat a snack because, people need to snack, or you need to take medicine, or you need to drink water, or whatever, there is a temporary, there's like, I think of it like a bathroom stall, in the sense of there's a separate area
Mm-hmm.
over there where people can take off their mask, eat a snack, sip some water, put it back on, and come back in, far away from, the rest of the group.
Right.
um, there's been some folks that I've been talking to that we want to create a blueprint, or something that's easy to really just give out to people. That's
Yeah.
definitely still in the works. But if anybody is interested in just how to make this safer, please feel free to DM me. I'm more than happy to hop on a call and just share my experiences. If you're like, wait, I have no clue, there's this one space and I don't think it's going to work out,
Mm-hmm.
reach out to me. I'm sure we can figure it out.
Yeah.
Anything's possible. I feel like almost anything is possible.
Yeah. And, as somebody has attended events that you've organized, you do run a tight ship. I really appreciate that you communicate so clearly before and after what is expected of people. As an attendee, it makes me feel really safe that I'm doing what is expected of me, but also that there is a standard, for the other people that are showing up, so that I feel safer, attending. And it really I feel like people have this idea that just because these policies are in place that it makes the event less fun, and it's definitely different than socializing without all of that. But I don't feel like it's inhibited me from having fun at all. And in fact, I have a lot more fun because I don't have to stress about the fact that I could be leaving sick. It's very unlikely considering all of the precautions that we take. I also appreciated that you enforce contact tracing and testing following the event as well. I think that's something that people might not think about as much anymore because we're kind of in the let it rip era. But that's another thing I think people who are looking to organize events can think about as well. So I appreciate that you have made yourself a hub of education on this. So if listeners don't already follow Gata on Instagram, I would highly encourage it because Gata shares a lot of information, not only about COVID, but just about, radical politics in general.
Yeah, definitely check out my Insta. I know I'm some upcoming events that are happening is, as we mentioned, our friend Janae and we are organizing Pot LA. We're doing a collaborative kind of thing with Pot LA where we're going to be doing planters. This is tentatively going to be for August 31st. All the information, whenever it's available, it'll definitely be on the gram. But it's also going to have COVID precautions, like the tight ship that we've been talking about. We're providing all the tests, all the masks. We're making everything as accessible as we can. It's wheelchair accessible as well. We're going to be making the air purifiers, so like the Corsi Rosenthal wedges. We might even raffle some away to some of the folks who attend, so that'll be a nice little thing. You might, come through, do a planter, and then leave with your planter and also with a Corsi Rosenthal box,
Yeah.
I'm making a whole bunch of merch right now. I'm doing fanny packs. I'm doing like art aprons that also are about just anti-eugenics, anti-fascism, a lot of really cool stuff. So hopefully, folks check me out there.
Yeah. So that's also on Instagram.
All of it is on Instagram.
Before we go, I have a question for you. So, why is wearing a high quality mask baddie behavior?
Okay, so it's baddie behavior because it's community care. It's care for you. It's care for others. It's not wanting to perpetuate white supremacy, eugenics, and everything that comes with it. Baddie with the Maskie is very much it's me trying to make fetch happen, where you can be cool and wear a mask,
Yeah.
I think something else that I wanted to say earlier that I just didn't have a chance to bring up before, as someone who is a temporarily able-bodied person, I think it's important to remember that, like, I think people will say, like, oh, I don't want to get COVID because I don't want to be disabled, and it's kind of like, it's seen as like a negative thing to be disabled when that's not the thing. The negative part is living in such an ableist society, because once you become disabled, once you become immunocompromised, all these things, now you have all these barriers which make it very difficult or damn near impossible to really be able to survive and thrive. So I did want to leave with that note.
That's a great note to leave on. I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast, for having this conversation with me, for educating our listeners, and for all of the work that you do in our community. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Let's look at our week ahead, shall we? So, the day that this podcast comes out is July 31st. We are wrapping up another month, if you can believe it. And we have the new moon in Leo on Sunday, August 4th. And that in and of itself is a big day, and I will talk about that. But if you remember from previous new moons, the lead up to any new moon is energy where things are being brought to our attention. And those awarenesses are meant to play a role in our new moon experience, because every single new moon is a new start. It's a fresh start. And it's a time to set intentions for the next several months of your life. It's the beginning of a cycle. But how do we know what kind of intentions we might want to set? Well, that's actually what the lead up is for. Those awarenesses, they have a purpose. They have some meaning to them. So over the next few days, definitely be listening to yourself. If obstacles come up, if frustrations come up, it may be that they're indicating where you need to bring some freshness into your life, where you need to turn over a new leaf, maybe approach things in a different way. And that's all fine and good. And if you've been listening to me for a while, maybe you're very seasoned at that and you can kind of ride those realizations into usefulness. On the evening of July 31st, the moon is moving into Cancer. And so I'm just going to say that the lead up to this new moon is probably going to be an emotional one. And take it from me, a Cancer rising. Emotions are nothing to fear. They're really nothing to fear. So if you find yourself being emotional over the next few days, again, that's a moment for reflection. That's a moment for looking within. What is this telling me about where I need to go next? So let that energy get you ready for the new moon on August 4th. And that new moon is going to be happening at 4:13 a.m. Pacific time. And it's happening at 12 degrees and 34 minutes of Leo. I'm not going to go too into detail on this new moon because I am running out of time. So patrons, if you are a sponsor of this podcast, I will be putting out a little bonus episode for you at some point before that new moon happens so that you have a better idea of some of the themes that we're going to be encountering. I also host the New Moon Manifesting Circle every month, and this time it's very special. We are meeting on the day of this new moon. So if you would like to join us to learn about the themes of this new moon, how you can use it to manifest and do some manifesting with a really lovely, warm group of people, you can join us over on Patreon. The link for that will be in the show notes as always. Later on August 4th, we also have Venus moving into Virgo, so that will be another shift in the energy. And then it just keeps coming on the 4th. That's going to be a big day. That evening, we have Mercury stationing retrograde in the sign of Virgo, and that's happening at 9:56 p.m. Pacific time. And the first thing to know about Mercury retrograde is that any time a planet is retrograde, it is not bad. It is not the cause for every single problem that is going wrong. I feel like Mercury gets the brunt of this blame 99% of the time because, people just know Mercury retrograde and they're like, oh, it's Mercury retrograde. Everything's Mercury retrograde, blah. And so there is a lot of negativity around this transit, and it's really, really undeserved because retrograde, especially with Mercury, is a time to catch your breath, to retrace your steps. So I prefer to think of it as a bit of a gift from the universe because we cannot be going full speed ahead at all times. That's how you get burnt out. That's also how we make mistakes that we don't need to necessarily make, because that happens when we push forward when we should be taking a rest, reassessing, editing, analyzing. So with this Mercury retrograde happening in the sign of Virgo to start off, it's going to be very much about the practical details of your life. So, getting your shit together. And we could all use that, right? I know that this year has kind of flown by for a lot of us. It's been very fast. There's been a lot of change. But if we don't take a moment to integrate the things that we've learned so far, we're wasting a lot of that experience that we've just had, right? And Virgo is very practical energy. So this could be like, getting the house together. If you have been putting off dealing with some car troubles, that's going to be an issue. I would highly recommend taking care of that before Sunday if you can. If you have work or other projects that you're kind of behind on, this retrograde will give you a chance to catch up on those things, to fix them, to tweak them, to get them in better shape. So rather than charging ahead and starting a bunch of new projects and getting all excited and spinning your wheels, this is about going back over stuff that you've already started or things that you've been meaning to do and just haven't quite had the time or the right energy for. If you want to get a better sense of what practical matters are going to be up for dealing with this Mercury retrograde, you can look at the house or the houses that 0 to 4 degrees Virgo land in your chart. And then Mercury will also be retrograding back into the sign of Leo. So we're also going to be looking at our goals, the vision that we have for our lives, for ourselves, and then reassessing our approach to that. Maybe our mentality isn't where it needs to be to achieve the things that we want to do. Or maybe we just need a new game plan about how we go after those goals in practical terms. Because we can have the biggest dreams in the world, but if it's not broken down into actionable steps, what are we actually doing to move towards those goals? So Mercury retrograde can be a very introspective time. It can be a very productive time if we use it that way instead of being like, oh, the sky's falling, Mercury's retrograde, everything's bad, you know? My standard advice for Mercury retrograde is to give yourself some grace. And remember that everybody else is also experiencing Mercury retrograde, whether they're aware of it or not. So, give people some room. Faster is not always better. So, before you fire off an email, make sure that it's got the right person in that address line. If you don't understand what somebody is saying, just ask for clarification if you can. If you have plans during this Mercury retrograde and they change last minute or they fall through, that's okay. It's kind of par for the course with the energy, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's the end of the world. So hold plans a little bit loosely and trust that things will work out the way that they're meant to work out. And I know it sounds goofy, that's why I did the little voice, but truly, if your plans change, it really doesn't have to be the end of the world. And I would expect things to not go exactly as planned during this retrograde. And we have this Mercury retrograde energy for the majority of August. So August 4th through August 28th, that's when Mercury stations direct. And by then it'll be at 21 degrees of Leo. So you can also look at where the last 9 degrees of Leo land in your chart for more information about what areas of life are going to be activated by this Mercury retrograde. And that'll give you an even more specific idea of where you can focus this retrograde energy. So go slow, drive safe. I'm pretty sure that the beginning of next week with all of these energy changes, and then we've got the moon in Virgo, I think it's going to be a little bit more of a cranky but also comedy of errors type vibe in the beginning of the week. But just because people are running around like chickens with their heads cut off doesn't mean that you can't be having a good time, that you can't be moving yourself forward in some way. So just remember that despite whatever the energy is, you always have the ability to make the most of it. And this life is short, so why wouldn't you do that, If you'd like even more astrology, you can join my Patreon for just $5 a month and get access to a library of astrological content, bonus episodes, and access to the Astro Den Discord, which is a growing community of people who are interested in astrology, spirituality, and building a better world. Also, we have got a lot of great memes in that Discord. And if that's not in the budget, don't worry. You can join Patreon for free. You can be part of the Petty Astrology community and also get access to my brand new newsletter, Petty Digest. The link to join is in the show notes. That's it for this week. I'll be back next week with another episode of Petty Astrology. This episode is brought to you by my sponsors over on Patreon.